So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut the uprights, and those are 40.5 inches. So I'm going to make a mark here, and I've already squared up all of these furring strips on the end, so I can now just cut them all at once instead of having to individually go through and make all those cuts. Just got to be careful moving it so I don't unsquare them. These pieces here will be the supports for the back, and my measurement for this is 50 1/8 inch. And then I'll just do the same for some 1x2s for the front. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make these, I'm going to rip these 1x2s to make these rungs here. And this is by far the most dangerous part of the whole process. And obvious reason is you could cut your finger, but the more real serious risk is kickback when you use a table saw, and just making sure that the wood doesn't projectile back at you. So just use some safety precautions. If you're not familiar with a table saw, maybe talk to somebody who is, or do a lot of research. One thing you definitely want to make sure you have is a splitter so that it can't push the wood into the blade. And this particular saw has these little anti-kickback pawls that will help. And I made a little push rod to help feed these through and just make sure that they get out clear of the blade. And since in this case it just kind of falls, I'm going to have someone help me pull these off and through. And then again, just stay off to the side of the blade, because of course the path that it would want to go is that way. And then what we'll do is just set the blade basically right in the middle of the board and feed these through. So in order to make my life a little bit easier here, when I do my 10.5 inch rungs, I'm just going to go ahead and make a mark on my miter saw at 10.5 inches. And that way I can just keep feeding my 8-foot pieces to that mark and making my cuts make it a little bit quicker. So I'm just getting ready to assemble my first ladder for the wine rack. And to make life a little bit easier, I'm going to go ahead and make a template. You don't have to do this at home, but it'll just save you a lot of measuring and just a lot of hassle. And I'm just going to nail it or screw it right down to my little workbench here. You could make this onto a piece of plywood or just onto another set of 2x4s. But what I've done is I've just cut 8 2x4s to 7 5/8 inches in length. And what that is just the spacing between my two uprights. And then also on my table I have a nice square side here. So I've clamped my two uprights down and run this one right along the square side here. And then I've just kind of laid things out so I've got space for my first cross beam, space for my middle cross beam, which actually I think I'm going to rearrange that one here just for looks a little bit. And then once I've nailed the top, I'll move this piece down to the bottom. And then just check your measurement here and just make sure that your front and back hasn't drifted too far off. If it's within about a 1/16 of an inch over this length, I'll be pretty pleased with that. Yep, and we're right on the money here. So I'm just going to go ahead and nail my first upright in place just to kind of hold things together. And I've already done some test shots with my nail gun into some scrap pieces just to dial in my pressure, and I'm running about 50 psi on this nail gun. Now that that's nailed, I can take this piece out and put it right back down here on the bottom, and then just go right on down the road here. I'm going to wait for the end of that one. Just make sure things aren't drifting on you. I'm not going to nail this one. And then I will go ahead and I can pop my clamps off now. Oh, actually I'm going to leave them on and screw down my boards. Now I can take my clamps off here and get a couple of those boards that were a little tougher to get. And I'll put a board on the bottom. And as I put these boards on, I'm putting the rounded half towards the inside. So basically the part that was ripped is up and I get those nice square edges. And then I can take this middle piece out and I'll put my rung towards the top side here. Again, that'll be where one of my cross members will go. Alright, once I've got it all nailed, I can go ahead and pull it out. I'm going to pull it really straight because there's really just not a lot of wiggle room literally in this. And this one here will become one of my end ladders. And before you go to make your second piece, just make sure that all the spacings between your guide here are just nice and smooth. Make sure, because there could have a burr there, or if you have to just loosen something up a little bit. And then what you do for this piece is you'll just go ahead and put the rungs in first. And this one's going to be a double-sided piece, so it'll become one of our middle pieces. Remember, on this one it goes towards the top. Then you'll just go ahead and put this piece on, square with the bottom. Watch that these don't drift out. And now I'm just going to run through and put my top pieces in. Now you can pull your piece out, and this is how you'll make all of your middle pieces, and you'll just repeat that process until you have the right amount, and make sure you don't forget that your last one's going to be again another end piece. So now I'm just going to go ahead and assemble my braces that go on the back. This is a little bit of a tricky part, so you might help to have a helper, but it's not completely required. And I'm going to go relatively heavy on the nails because there's just not going to be much holding this together until I get a handful of these in. And I've pre-marked my boards here so that I know exactly where to put them. I'm just evenly spacing these, so each mark is 4 1/8 inches apart. Or sorry, 4 1/8. So I've got all the cross supports in the back nailed in, and I've moved my rack into the position where it's going to stay. And I just wanted to do this before I finally secured everything up because it's a little bit easier to screw it to the wall without your front supports on. And it's also a little bit easier just to kind of seat it into position without all the supports in, because each one of these rows has some flexibility to kind of contort a little bit, and you can kind of make it match the slope of your floor because of that. So this floor is in a basement, so it's got just a little bit of slope to it. But before I put my front supports on, I'm going to go ahead and put a screw in the back of this thing to the wall. It's hard because you've got a battery here, just trying to work around the battery. And I just drilled a 3/16 hole with a normal wood bit, and I'm going to go ahead and drill a 5/32 with my masonry bit here for my Tapcon screw. And that should be deep enough, and then I'm just going to go ahead and put my Tapcon in. Now that it's nice and sturdy up against the wall, I can go ahead and use my marks on my support boards and put everything together here. And I'm just going to go ahead and cap this off with a bonus piece here that'll just kind of make it look a little more finished. I just have an extra piece of 1x3 that I'll throw on the top just so I don't have the exposed rungs. Now we can go ahead and start filling up the wine rack.